was my fated mate, my only hope. And in front of the entire pack, he sneered and said the one word that ended my life: reject. That single mate betrayal sealed my fate. I was now a wolfless omega, property, to be sold to the highest bidder. Chapter 1: The Fated Mate's Cruelty. The words echoed in my head, a death sentence delivered before the execution, sold to the highest bidder. I was Evangeline, a wolfless omega of the Silvermoon Pack, and tonight was my claiming day. It should have been the most magical night of my life. For every other she-wolf, it was a night of celebration, of finding their mate, of securing their future. For me, it was a night of silent, desperate prayer. The great bonfire roared in the center of the clearing, casting dancing, monstrous shadows against the ancient pines. The entire pack was gathered, their faces painted with excitement and anticipation. My dress was simple linen, pale and thin, a stark contrast to the rich furs and leathers worn by the other omegas of age. They were beautiful, vibrant, their inner wolves shining in their eyes. I had no inner wolf. I was an aberration, a flaw, a burden. My only hope, the single thread I clung to, was him, Tristan, son of our alpha, the golden boy of our pack, and, according to the thrumming, painful pull in my chest, my fated mate. I had loved him from afar my entire life. He was sunlight and strength, laughter and command. Surely the goddess wouldn't be so cruel as to bind us, only for him to cast me aside. The fated bond was sacred. It was supposed to be the one law that trumped all others. He had been distant for weeks, but I'd told myself he was just nervous, preparing for his duties. Alpha Alaric, his father, raised his hands. Let the claiming begin. One by one, names were called. She-wolves were stepped forward, and their mates, new or fated, would step forward to claim them. There were cheers, nuzzles, and proud growls. And then there was only me. Evangeline, Alpha Alaric called, his voice flat, bored. I stepped into the circle, my hands trembling so hard I had to clench them into fists at my sides. The clearing went silent. This was it, the moment that would either save me or condemn me. I looked at Tristan. He stood beside his father, his expression unreadable, his handsome features carved from stone. Tristan, his father prompted, an edge to his voice. The goddess has marked her for you. Step forward, claim your mate. Tristan didn't move. My heart didn't just sink, it shattered. The emotional love story I had clutched in my heart was a childish fantasy. Tristan, his father growled, a low warning. Tristan took a single, slow step forward. He stopped 10 feet from me. He looked at me, his eyes traveling from my hopeful, terrified face down to my simple dress and then back up. And he sneered. It was a small, cruel twist of his lips, but it was the most painful thing I had ever seen. Evangeline, he said, his voice carrying across the silent clearing, the moon goddess has erred. A collective gasp sucked the air from the clearing. You are wolfless, he declared, his voice rising in strength, playing to the pack. You are barren. You cannot shift, you cannot hunt, you cannot bear a strong air. He raised his chin, his eyes cold and hard as flint. You are weak. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a sob. I, Tristan, future alpha of the Silvermoon Pack, he roared, hereby reject you as my mate. The pain was physical, a silver knife, heated in the bonfire, plunging straight into my chest and twisting. The fated bond snapped. I cried out, a raw, strangled sound, and fell to my knees, clutching my heart. The mate betrayal was complete. The pack didn't look at me with pity. They looked at me with contempt. The murmurs started, voices that had been kind to me that very morning, now laced with disgust. A rejected omega, wolfless and rejected. He did the right thing. Alpha Alaric stepped forward, his face not angry, but relieved. This is what he had wanted. This is what they had all wanted. My rejection secured Tristan's political future, allowing him to mate with a high-status she-wolf from another pack. I was just a loose end. He raised his ceremonial staff over me. A rejected wolfless Omega has no status, no name, no place in this pack. He slammed the butt of the staff onto the hard-packed earth. She is unclaimed property, he boomed. She will be sold to the highest bidder at the full moon. Take her to the cells. Two heavy-handed guards grabbed my arms, hauling me to my feet like a sack of rotted meat. I didn't fight. I was numb. As they dragged me from the circle, I looked back one last time. Tristan was already being clapped on the back by his friends, a relieved smile on his face. He didn't even watch me go. Chapter 2, The Sting of Mate Betrayal. The cell was cold. It wasn't just cold, it was a deep, seeping dampness that crawled into my bones and settled there. The only light came from a tiny barred slit high in the stone wall, casting a single, hopeless beam of moonlight onto the mouldy straw. The air stank of mildew and despair. I had been here for 3 days. The numbness had worn off, leaving behind a hollow, aching grief. The phantom pain of the broken bond was constant, a throbbing reminder of the mate betrayal. I would have no emotional love story. I would have no pack, no family. My life, the one I had dreamed of, was over. Now I was just waiting for the full moon, waiting for the auction, waiting to become the property of some leering, brutal alpha who would use me until I broke. I huddled in the corner, my knees drawn to my chest, my simple linen dress now torn and stained. I had no more tears to cry. A heavy bar scraped outside my door. I flinched, pressing myself harder against the stones. A key turned in the old rusty lock. The door creaked open, spilling yellow torchlight into my dark little world. A shadow fell over me. Evangeline. My heart stopped. I knew that voice. I looked up. Tristan stood in the doorway, framed by the light. He looked just as golden and handsome as he had at the claiming. He wasn't even wearing guard's clothes. He was in his fine leathers, as if he'd just come from dinner. He stepped inside, his nose wrinkling at the smell. "You have to understand, Evangeline," he said, his voice soft, pitying. That was somehow worse than his anger. I just stared at him, my heart a cold, dead stone in my chest. "I did what I had to do," he continued, taking another step. He wouldn't come too close. "My pack, our pack, it needs a strong Luna. It needs powerful heirs. You can't provide that. You're a genetic dead end." "You were my fated mate," I whispered, my voice raw and cracked from disuse. He winced. "It was a mistake, a flaw in the system. The goddess was wrong, and I fixed it. I'm doing this for our people. It's for the best." He knelt, bringing himself closer to my level, though his eyes darted around, clearly disgusted by the filth. "I'm sure one of the alphas who buys you will be kind," he offered, as if that was some great comfort. "Some of them just want an Omega to run their household. It won't be so bad. You're strong. You'll manage. Not the rejection, not the sentence, not the cell." It was his patronizing, self-serving pity, the pathetic attempt to paint himself as a noble, tragic hero who had made the hard choice. The hollow grief inside me didn't just fade, it froze. It crystallized into a single, sharp, cold shard of pure, unadulterated anger. I slowly lifted my head, my matted hair falling away from my face. I looked him dead in the eye. He wasn't a golden god. He wasn't the strong future alpha I had adored. He was a coward, a weak, pathetic boy, terrified of his father, terrified of responsibility, and terrified of a future that wasn't handed to him on a silver platter. "Get out," I said, My voice was quiet, but it was hard as the stone floor. Tristan's eyes widened in surprise. He'd expected me to be a sobbing, broken mess, begging him for help. "Evangeline, I'm just trying to—" I repeated, pushing myself to my feet. "Get out." He stood up, his expression hardening. The pity was gone, replaced by the familiar sneer. "Fine, have it your way," he scoffed, turning his back on me. "Rot in here for all I care. Don't say I didn't try to explain." He stormed out, slamming the heavy wooden door behind him. The bar slid back into place, plunging me back into darkness. I stood there shaking, but not from cold, not anymore. I was alone. I was wolfless. I was about to be sold like cattle. But I was not broken. Tristan had taken my life, my future, and my heart. But that cold, hard thing left in my chest, that was mine. A new, heavy set of footsteps echoed down the hall. This wasn't Tristan's light, arrogant stride. This was the heavy, booted tread of guards. The bar on my door scraped open again. 2 burly guards filled the doorway, their faces set in grim lines. "It's time, property," one of them grunted. "The auction is beginning." Chapter 3. Sold to the Alpha. They didn't let me clean myself. They dragged me from the cell, my bare feet stumbling on the cold stone, and hauled me through the back corridors of the Pax house, away from the warmth and light. They shoved me out a back door and into the auction clearing. It wasn't the sacred clearing of the bonfire. This was a muddy, rutted circle used for training and for slaughtering livestock. A crude wooden block had been erected in the center. It was a stage, and I was the main performance. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed fur, stale ale, and a sharp, coiling testosterone that made my stomach turn. Alphas and betas from a dozen different packs were gathered, their eyes all fixed on me. They were leering, sizing me up. I was a mare to be inspected, a prize to be won. Alpha Alaric stood on a small platform next to the block, acting as auctioneer. He was selling me off like a piece of old furniture. "And now," he announced, his voice jovial, "the final lot of the night, a Silver Moon Omega, 20 years old, strong, healthy, obedient." He conveniently left out wolfless and rejected. They all knew. That's why I was here. A guard shoved me forward, forcing me to stumble up the 2 steps onto the block. I stood there, bathed in the cold light of the full moon, my thin shift doing nothing to hide me from their hungry, appraising stares. My chains clinked, the sound echoing in the horrible silence. "What am I bid for this unique opportunity?" Alaric began. "20 pieces of silver," a voice cried. "30," another shouted, followed by a cruel laugh. My price was a joke. I was worthless. 50, a new voice barked, and the crowd quieted. Alpha Draven of the Red Fang Pack. His reputation was a black stain on the territories. He was known for his broken omegas. He collected them. He stared at me, a wolfish grin splitting his scarred face. My blood ran cold, anyone but him. 50 from Alpha Draven, Alaric said, pleased. Do I hear 60? Silence. No one wanted to bid against Draven. Going once, Alaric called, his voice bright. My stomach heaved. I was going to be sick. Going twice. Please no, goddess, anyone but him. Boom. The great iron-banded gates to the clearing slammed open, vibrating in their frames. A new scent cut through the stink. It was sharp, cold, and clean. Pine needles, fresh snow, and old blood. The entire crowd went silent, turning as one. A figure stood silhouetted against the moonlight. He was huge, taller and broader than any wolf in the clearing. He walked forward, and the crowd of alphas and betas instinctively parted for him, like prey scattering before a predator. He stepped into the ring of torchlight, and I saw him. He was the nightmare told in pack legends, Lucian, the alpha male of the Shadowclaw pack, sworn enemies of Silvermoon for generations. He was terrifying. A massive jagged scar ran from his right temple straight down over his eye, which was a milky, blind white, and disappeared into his thick black beard. He was dressed in black leathers and a heavy cloak of black fur, dusted with snow. He looked like Winter-Given form, a paranormal romance villain made real. He didn't look at Alaric, he didn't look at the crowd, he looked at me. His one good eye, a chip of icy blue, locked onto mine. There was no lust, no pity, just assessment. It was the most intense, terrifying gaze I had ever felt. "You're late, Shadowclaw," Alpha Alaric said, his voice tight. "The bidding for this lot is closed." Lucian's head turned, slowly. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated in my very bones. "I am not here to bid for Silvermoon's scraps." The insult hung in the freezing air. Tristan, who I now saw was standing near his father, bristled. "Then you have no business here," Tristan snapped, trying to sound brave. Lucian didn't even look at him. His gaze was fixed on Alaric. "I am here to challenge for the property." Gasps. The challenge of might. It was an ancient, brutal law, rarely used. It meant a fight to the death. Alaric's face went pale. To refuse was to show weakness to every pack here. "You would challenge my pack for a flawed omega?" "I would challenge your pack because I can," Lucian stated, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Alaric, trapped, nodded. "So be it, Victor. To me, defend your pack's honor." The pack's champion, a brute of a wolf shifter named Victor, the same one who had trained Tristan, cracked his knuckles and stepped forward, drawing two massive axes. Lucian didn't move. He just shrugged off his heavy fur cloak. He didn't even draw a weapon. Victor roared and charged. It was over in 5 seconds. Victor swung his axes in a wild, powerful arc. Lucian moved inside the swing, a blur of black leather. There was a sickening crack as he drove his elbow into Victor's throat, followed by the wet schnick of a hidden silver blade sliding between his ribs. Lucian stepped back, wiping his dagger clean on his pants, as Victor crumpled to the ground, dead before he hit the mud. Silence. The only sound was the wind whistling through the pines. Lucian stalked to the platform. He didn't climb the steps. He simply put one hand on the block and vaulted up, landing in front of me with a thud that shook the wood. He looked at Alpha Alaric, who was frozen in horror. He looked at Tristan, who looked like he was going to be sick. Then he reached down and threw a heavy, jangling pouch of gold at Tristan's feet. It landed with a soft thud in the mud. "My payment," he growled. He turned to me. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. He raised his dagger. I flinched, crying out. He simply turned the blade and, with one clean slice, cut the ropes binding my wrists. He grabbed my arm. His grip was iron, his hand hot against my freezing skin. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't a rescue. It was a claiming. He pulled me off the block, and I stumbled, following him as he strode back toward the gate. He didn't look back once. She is mine. Chapter 4. The Price of Forbidden Love. His grip was iron. My feet stumbled over the frozen mud as he hauled me through the gate, away from the jeering, stunned crowd of my former pack. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My life as a Silvermoon was over. My life as property had just been solidified. We plunged into the blackness of the forest, moving at a pace just short of a run. The cold bit at me instantly, slicing through my thin linen shift. I was barefoot, but Lucian didn't seem to notice or care. Stones and frozen roots tore at the soles of my feet, but I bit my lip and forced myself to keep up. To show any weakness here to this man felt like a death sentence. A dozen warriors, all clad in the same black furs and leathers as their alpha, materialized from the shadows of the trees. They had been his silent backup, waiting. They were as terrifying as he was, scarred, silent, and massive. They formed a tight perimeter around us as we moved, their eyes glinting in the moonlight, scanning the woods. Not a single word was spoken. The only sounds were our footsteps crackling on the forest floor and the whistle of the wind in the high pines. I was terrified. This was not a rescue. This was a hostile takeover. I glanced up at the man dragging me along, Lucian, the Shadowclaw Alpha. His face was a mask of cold fury, his one good eye fixed forward. He hadn't said a single word to me since "she is mine." I wasn't a person to him. I was a thing, a prize he had won, a strategic move in his ages-old feud with the Silvermoon Pack. He hadn't saved me, he had just acquired me. My status hadn't changed, only my master. I had traded one cage for another, and this one felt infinitely more dangerous. The Silvermoon Pack had looked at me with contempt. The Shadowclaw warriors looked at me with open hatred. I was a symbol of their enemy, a Silvermoon Omega, and now I was in their midst. Was this what forbidden love felt like? No, this wasn't love. This was a forbidden transaction, a political maneuver sealed in blood, and I was the currency. We walked for what felt like hours. My feet were numb, then they were burning, then they were just gone. I was shivering violently, my teeth chattering so hard I thought they would break. I stumbled, my ankle twisting on a hidden root, and I went down hard, crying out as my knee struck a sharp rock. The entire war party stopped. I lay on the frozen ground, sobbing, a pathetic broken heap. Lucian turned, his massive form eclipsing the moon. I cringed, bracing for a blow, for him to drag me to my feet and snarl at me for my weakness. He stared down at me, his expression unreadable. With a low, animalistic growl, he bent down, but he didn't grab my arm. In one swift, shocking movement, he scooped me up, lifting me from the ground as if I weighed nothing. He tossed me over his shoulder like a sack of grain, his scarred, hard shoulder digging into my stomach. I was too stunned to even gasp. He didn't say a word. He just turned and continued walking, his long, powerful strides devouring the path. The humiliation was a hot flash that momentarily warmed me. I was being carried like a kill from a hunt. I was slung over his back, my head dangling, my useless feet kicking at the air. But then, something else registered. His body was a furnace. The heat radiating from him, even through his thick leathers, was immense. It soaked into my chest, my stomach, a blessed warmth that my freezing body desperately craved. His scent was overwhelming, pine and snow, and a dark, musky scent of a predator. It should have been terrifying. But after hours of freezing, the warmth was everything. Against my will, my shivering body relaxed, clinging to that heat. I was so exhausted, so cold. I was a flawed Omega, property, a prize of war. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't freezing. I must have drifted into a state of shock, because the next thing I knew, the world exploded. A high-pitched whistle tore through the night. Lucian growled, a deep-chested sound of pure rage, and threw me. I landed hard in a snowdrift, the air knocked from my lungs as he spun, drawing a massive blade I hadn't even seen. "Ambush!" one of his warriors roared. The forest erupted, arrows rained down, dark shapes burst from the trees, and the clearing we were passing through became a vortex of snarling, shifting wolves and the clash of silver on steel. Shadowclaw warriors met the attackers head-on. It was a blur of black fur and grey. A warrior broke through the line, his eyes mad, and lunged for me. Before I could even scream, a black shadow intercepted him, Lucian. He didn't just fight, he ended. His blade was a blur. The attacker fell, his throat ripped open. Lucian turned, his face a mask of primal fury, his one blue eye blazing like a star. He shoved me behind his back, his arm a steel bar. "Stay down!" he roared. I scrambled back, crab-walking into the shadow of a boulder as he and his men formed a defensive circle. And then I saw him. Across the small clearing, standing in the moonlight with a silver crossbow raised. "Aye, Tristan?" His face was a twisted mask of rage and humiliation. He hadn't come for me. He had come for Lucian. He had come to reclaim his pack's honor. "You stole my property, Shadowclaw!" Tristan screamed, his voice cracking like a terrified adolescent's. "She was never yours to claim, boy," Lucian spat, parrying a blow from another attacker. "She is mine!" Tristan shrieked, and he aimed the crossbow. Not at Lucian, at me. My blood turned to ice. Lucian saw it. He saw the bow shift. He had a choice: block the warrior attacking his left or deal with the arrow about to hit me. He didn't hesitate. He roared, a sound that was not human, and threw himself in front of me. Thwack! The sound was sickening, a silver-tipped quarrel, thick as my thumb, burying itself deep into Lucian's chest, just below the collarbone. Lucian froze. He looked down at the feathered shaft protruding from his own body. He looked up, his icy eye finding Tristan across the clearing. Tristan's face was a mask of pure, abject terror. He hadn't meant to hit the alpha, he had aimed for me. He dropped the crossbow and screamed, "Retreat! Retreat!" Like cowards, he and his war party vanished back into the trees, their objective complete. Lucian was as good as dead. Silver was poison. The clearing fell silent. Lucian stood for a second, then another. He turned, slowly, to look at me. His expression wasn't angry. It was surprised. He opened his mouth, as if to say something, but only a gout of dark blood spilled over his lips. And then, like a great tree, he fell. Chapter 5. Don't die or they'll sell me. For a full 10 seconds I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The world had gone silent. The only sound was the wind, the heavy, pained breathing of the surviving Shadowclaw warriors, and the dripping of blood onto the snow. Lucian lay face down, unmoving, the silver-tipped arrow sticking straight up from his back, a grotesque feathered marker for a fresh grave. "Alpha!" one of his warriors bellowed, rushing to his side. It was Silas, the beta, the one who had looked at me with such hatred. He tried to turn Lucian over, but his hands were shaking. He's not breathing right. The silver, it's in his lung. Panic, pure, unadulterated panic ripped through the warriors. Their alpha was down. They were deep in enemy territory. They were exposed. My mind was a blank, white static. Tristan was gone. He had run, leaving his enemy to die. And me, he had left me too. I was alone, again, trapped between my former pack, who now wanted me dead, and my new pack, whose alpha I had just gotten killed. If Lucian died, my blood ran cold. If Lucian died, his claim on me was void. I was no one's. I was unclaimed property again. Tristan wouldn't come back for me, not now, but Draven, that scarred, leering alpha from the auction, he would. He would hunt me down, or my own pack would drag me back, and the auction would start all over again. My fate was tied to the man bleeding out in the snow. Silas, the beta, looked up from his dying alpha, and his eyes, full of grief and rage, landed on me. "You!" he roared, pointing a bloody finger. "This is your fault. You're a curse. You're Silvermoon poison." He was right. "Leave her," another warrior growled. "She'll freeze. It's what she deserves. We have to get the alpha back." "We can't move him," Silas yelled, his voice breaking. "The silver, moving him will kill him faster." They were falling apart. Their leader was gone, and they were descending into chaos. And in that moment, the cold, hard shard of anger I had found in my cell, it took over. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a prize. I was a survivor. I got to my feet, my legs shaking so hard I could barely stand. "Shut up," I whispered. Silas looked at me, stunned. "What did you say, Omega?" "I said shut up," I screamed, the sound ripping from my raw throat. "You're acting like pups! Crying won't save him!" I scrambled through the snow, pushing past the shocked warriors, and fell to my knees beside Lucian. His breath was a horrible, wet gurgle. "We have to get the arrow out," I said, my voice sharp, "and we have to stop the bleeding, now." "We can't," Silas said, his face pale. "It's silver. It will burn you." "I'm wolfless," I spat, the first time I had ever said the word with strength. "It won't burn me as fast, and I don't care." I grabbed the shaft of the arrow. "He's right," I said, my voice low and desperate. "We can't move him like this. We need shelter. Find a cave, a hollow, anything, now." The warriors just stared at me. "Are you his beta or not?" I snarled at Silas. "Get your men in line and find shelter." Maybe it was the shock. Maybe it was the command in my voice. But Silas's eyes hardened, and he nodded. "You two with me. Find a den. The rest of you perimeter. Watch for those Silvermoon cowards." The warriors scattered, their panic replaced by a new, frantic purpose. I was alone with Lucian. He was so big, so still, the great protective alpha who had shielded me with his own body, dying at my feet. I put my head on his back, near the wound. I could hear the air wheezing in and out, the awful wet sound of a punctured lung. "Please," I whispered, my tears freezing on his leather armor. "Please don't die. You can't die." I wasn't just begging for him, I was begging for me. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in ragged sobs. I gripped the arrow shaft, my other hand braced on his back. I looked around at the dark, silent trees, at the blood staining the snow. I heard the distant howl of a wolf. Was it Tristan's pack, or just a lone hunter? I was so scared. I leaned in close, my lips brushing the shell of his ear, my voice breaking. "You can't leave me," I sobbed, the words torn from the deepest, most selfish, and most honest part of my soul. "Don't die, or they'll sell me." Chapter 6, A Glimmer in the Paranormal Romance. "Found one! Over here! A bear den!" Silas's voice cut through my haze of panic. "Move," I commanded, my own voice surprising me. With the help of 2 other warriors, we got Lucian onto a makeshift stretcher made of their fur cloaks. Every jostle sent a fresh wave of blood spilling from his lips, but he was unconscious now, his breathing shallow. The den was a deep, dark cleft in a rock face, hidden behind a curtain of ivy. It was small, but it was dry, and it was defensible. We carried him inside, into the musky darkness. "Get a fire started," I ordered, "but keep it small, no smoke." I tore a strip of fabric from my already ruined shift. I needed light. One of the warriors lit a torch, and I immediately shoved it into a crack in the rock wall, casting a flickering, hellish light over the scene. Lucian lay on the cloaks, his skin a ghastly pale grey. The silver was poisoning him, fast. "You two, outside," I said to the warriors. "Guard the entrance." "We stay with our alpha," one growled. "You'll stay where you're useful," I snapped, my fear making me brave. "He needs air. He doesn't need you hovering. Silas, you stay. I need your hands." The beta looked at me, his expression a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. He nodded, and the others left, plunging the cave into near silence. "Hold him down," I said. "What? Hold his shoulders. When I pull this out, he's going to wake up, and he's going to move. Don't let him." Silas knelt and put his massive hands on Lucian's shoulders, pinning him to the floor. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I straddled Lucian's waist, planting my knees on the rocky ground. I wrapped both my hands around the arrow's shaft. It was slick with blood. "On 3, I whispered. 1, 2. I didn't wait for 3. I yanked. I screamed. Lucian roared. It was a sound I will never forget, a bellow of pure animal agony. His back arched off the floor, lifting my entire body with him. His one good eye snapped open, blind with pain. Silas grunted, using all his weight to hold him down as Lucian thrashed. The arrow came free with a sickening suck. Blood, black in the torchlight, gushed from the wound. "Press on it!" I shrieked at Silas, who was staring in horror. He snapped out of it, pressing his whole hand over the wound. I scrambled off Lucian, my hands covered in his blood. I grabbed the torch from the wall and held the head of the silver arrow in the flame, heating it until it glowed a dull, angry red. "This is going to be worse," I warned Silas. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Sealing it. It's the only way." I pressed the glowing silver head into the wound. This time, Lucian's scream was short. He thrashed once, violently, and then passed out, his body going limp. The smell of burning flesh filled the small cave, and I gagged, bile rising in my throat. But the bleeding had stopped. I collapsed backward, my back hitting the cave wall, and slid to the floor. I was shaking from head to toe. Silas was breathing heavily. He looked at the wound. He looked at me. He didn't say thank you. He just nodded once and went back to his post at the cave entrance. I was alone with the Alpha again. I crawled back to his side. He was alive, barely. His breathing was still a wet rattle, but it was deeper now. The silver was out. Now it was just a race between his body and the poison left behind. I was exhausted, so cold. I tore another strip from my dress, dipped it in the snow I'd gathered at the cave mouth, and began to clean the blood and soot from his back. This was the strangest, darkest paranormal romance I could ever have imagined, trapped in a cave, nursing the enemy Alpha who had bought me. He was the first Alpha who had ever protected me. He hadn't looked at me with contempt. He hadn't looked at me with lust, like Draven, or with cold calculation like Tristan. He had just looked at me, and then he had thrown himself in front of an arrow for me. Why? I gently turned his head to the side, wiping the blood from his lips. I studied his face in the flickering light. The scar was brutal, pulling at his blind eye, giving him a permanent, menacing cast. But beneath it, his features, they weren't cruel. They were just hard. Set, like a man who had faced 1,000 ambushes and had never once flinched. I spent the rest of the night watching him. I changed the dressings. I forced melted snow and water between his lips when he moaned. I sat, huddled in my own arms, watching the rise and fall of his massive chest. Hours passed. The torch burned low. I was so tired, my eyelids felt like lead. I must have drifted off, my head falling forward onto my knees. I was woken by a sound, a low, gravelly groan. My head snapped up. Lucian's one good eye was open. It wasn't glazed with pain anymore. It was sharp, and it was focused directly on me. We stared at each other in the dim, dying light of the torch. He was weak, his voice a raw, torn whisper, but it held all the authority of an Alpha. "Who are you?" Chapter 7, The Alpha's Gaze. His voice, though a raw whisper, cut through the small cave, silencing the wind outside. "Who are you?" I was frozen. My heart, which had been pounding with exhaustion and fear, seemed to stop. I stared into his one good eye. It was no longer glassy with pain. It was sharp, intelligent, and it was locked on me with an intensity that stripped me bare. Before I could find my voice, the sound of heavy boots on stone announced Silas. He burst back into the den, his face grim, but it lit up with a raw, stunned relief when he saw his leader. "Alpha," he breathed, rushing forward and dropping to one knee beside the cot of furs. "You're awake, goddess be praised." Lucian did not look at his beta. His gaze did not waver from my face. "I asked," he rasped, his throat clicking with the effort. "Who are you?" The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Silas looked from his Alpha to me, his expression hardening again into suspicion. I swallowed, my throat dry and aching. I am Evangeline," I whispered, my voice trembling. "The Omega you bought from Silvermoon." Lucian's eye narrowed. The word "bought" seemed to anger him. He tried to prop himself up on his elbows. a low growl rumbling in his chest. But the movement was too much. A sharp, agonizing gasp tore from his lips, and his face went pale as he collapsed back onto the furs. I moved without thinking, pure instinct. Don't move, I said, my voice sharp. I put my hand on his uninjured shoulder, a small, foolish attempt to keep the massive alpha down. You'll tear the wound open again. You're still poisoned. Don't you touch him, Silvermoon Witch, Silas snarled, lurching toward me. Enough. It was one word, spoken with barely any air, but it was absolute. Silas froze, his hand halfway to my arm. Lucian raised his left hand, a gesture that silenced his beta completely. The alpha male romance I'd read about was never like this. It wasn't about flowers and declarations. It was about this raw, undeniable power that could command a warrior with a flick of his wrist. He was assessing me. The predator was wounded, but his mind was sharp. Silas, Lucian rasped, his gaze still holding mine. Report. Silas, clearly hating that he had to speak with me present, gave a clipped, military-style summary. Ambushed, 10, maybe 12 Silvermoon cowards, led by the whelp, Tristan. They hit you with a silver quarrel. Right side, punctured the lung. Lucian's eyes flickered. And the arrow? Silas's jaw tightened. He jerked his chin at me. She pulled it out, cauterized the wound, with the arrowhead. Lucian processed this. His gaze dropped from my face to my hands, which were still stained with his blood. He looked at the crude bandages I'd made from my shift. Then his eyes flicked to the cave floor, to the discarded, bloody arrow shaft. Slowly, his icy blue eye travelled back to my face. The burning hatred I'd seen from his warriors was gone. The cold assessment was gone. It was replaced by something else. A deep, calculating curiosity. You saved me, he stated. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a thank you. It was a fact he was trying to solve. I felt that flash of cold, hard honesty again. I wouldn't pretend to be a hero. I saved myself, I whispered, and my words were sharp as his own dagger. If you die, I'm sold, back to Alpha Alaric, or worse. The cave was so quiet I could hear the blood dripping from his wound onto the furs. A strange alien expression twisted Lucian's mouth. It was not a smile. It was something far more dangerous. The slightest quirk of his scarred lip. A wolfless omega, with claws, he rasped. He was quiet for a long moment, his eye searching my face for something. I felt like a page in a book he was reading. Then his gaze hardened. The brief moment of connection was gone, replaced by the alpha. He coughed, a wet rattling sound, and a fresh fleck of blood appeared on his lips. Get me home, he commanded, the words weak but ironclad. Now. He said it to Silas, but his gaze never left mine, and I knew, with a sinking, terrifying certainty, that the order included me. I was no longer just his property. I was his keeper. Chapter 8. The emotional love story's brutal start. The journey back was a waking nightmare. We left the relative safety of the den at dawn. The world was a wash of grey, icy light. Lucian was a deadweight, but his pride was a raw, living thing. He refused to be carried on a stretcher. He would walk, or he would die. In the end, he did both. He stalked through the snow, leaning heavily on Silas and another warrior, his face a mask of sweat and agony. He was burning with fever, the silver poison still wreaking havoc on his body. Every few miles he would collapse, and we would be forced to rest, exposed and vulnerable. And I was his shadow. At our first stop, Silas had looked at me, my body shaking violently in the tattered remains of my shift. Lucian, his eyes glassy with fever, had just grunted and nodded at Silas. Cloak. Silas, his face a mask of fury, had unslung his own heavy fur cloak and thrown it at my feet. Don't get used to it, he'd spat. I didn't say a word. I just wrapped the massive heavy cloak around my shoulders. It smelled of pine, male sweat, and wolf, but it was warm. It was life. My duty was clear. At every stop, while the warriors stood perimeter, their eyes scanning the trees, I was the one who knelt before the great Alpha. I was the one who had to unpeel the crude bandage, clean the still oozing, blackened wound with handfuls of snow, and rebind it. My hands were numb, my fingers were blue with cold, but I didn't hesitate. I worked quickly, my movements precise. I knew they were all watching me. The hatred from the warriors hadn't vanished, but it was now laced with a confusing, grudging respect. I was the enemy. I was a silver moon, but I was also the only reason their Alpha was still breathing. At one point, as dusk painted the snow in shades of purple and blood, Lucian's legs gave out. He fell to his knees, his head hanging. "Alpha," Silas urged, trying to pull him up. "Leave me," Lucian growled, his voice thick with delirium. "We can't, Alpha, the Silver Moon Pack." I said, "Leave me." I pushed past Silas. I knelt in the snow right in front of him. "Get up," I said. His head snapped up, his one blue eye blazing with feverish rage. "A Silver Moon Omega gives me orders. A dead Alpha is no use to me," I countered, my voice low and fierce. "You said I was your property. Well, I won't be your property if you die of stupidity in the snow. Get up." His gaze locked on mine. He was seeing more than me. He was seeing a ghost. His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. His grip was weak, but still like an iron band. "Don't let them see you break," he rasped, his gaze unfocused, looking through me. "Do you hear me? Never let them see you." Was he talking to me, or to someone from his scarred past? This wasn't an alpha male romance. This was the brutal, bloody start of an emotional love story, founded not on fate, but on shared desperation. I saw a crack in his armor. I saw the man beneath the protective alpha. My heart, which I had thought was a dead, cold stone, gave a painful, stupid lurch. I put my free hand over his. "I won't," I said, my voice soft. "And neither will you. Now get up." Slowly, using my much smaller arm for leverage, he hauled his massive body back to his feet. We walked for another hour before Silas held up a hand. "We're here, the border." I looked up. It wasn't a line of trees, it was a wall, a massive 15-foot palisade of sharpened logs and black stone built into a narrow, defensible mountain pass. This wasn't a pack village, it was a fortress, the Shadowclaw stronghold. Guards on the wall saw us. "The Alpha, he's wounded. Open the gates." The massive gates groaned open, and we half carried, half dragged Lucian inside. It was the city of stone. Houses and halls were carved directly into the mountain, connected by winding, torchlit stairs. It was brutal, stark, and powerful. Pack members, dozens of them, poured from the doorways, their faces stricken with terror and disbelief. To see their alpha, their god, wounded and leaning on two of his men, it was like seeing the sun fall from the sky. And then they saw me. The enemy, a Silver Moon Omega, wrapped in a Shadowclaw cloak, walking beside their dying leader. The looks of fear for their alpha instantly curdled into pure, unadulterated venom aimed directly at me. An old imposing she-wolf shoved her way through the crowd. Her long hair was a silver-streaked mane, her eyes as sharp and blue as Lucian's. Sabine, the pack's healer, she commanded the same respect. She looked at Lucian, her face a mask of grief. Then she looked at me. Her lip curled. "What is this?" she snarled, her voice carrying over the crowd. "Silas, you've brought a curse into our home, a Silver Moon harlot." Chapter 9. The She-Wolf's Den. The word harlot hung in the cold mountain air. The crowd surged, their growls deepening. "She saved him, Sabine," Silas roared, shoving back a warrior who got too close. "She pulled the silver." Sabine, the pack's healer, didn't so much as blink. She stepped forward and, to my shock, pressed her nose to my throat, sniffing me like an animal. Her eyes were cold. "She is wolfless," Sabine declared, as if it were the final damning evidence. "She's of no use. We don't need another mouth to feed." She turned away from me, all her attention on Lucian. She pulled the silver. "Fine, her use is at an end. Bring him to the healing hall. Someone take this to the kitchens. Or the kennels." She dismissed me, like I was a stray dog Silas had dragged in. My former pack saw me as mate betrayal personified. This pack saw me as a curse. My new reality, sold to the Alpha, was just one hostile cage for another. The crowd began to close in. Lucian was hauled away by Silas and the other warriors, his head lolling. He was unconscious again. I was left alone, completely, terrifyingly alone in the center of a hostile pack. A young she-wolf, her face twisted in a sneer, shoved me. "Filthy Silvermoon," she spat, pushing me so hard I stumbled on the icy stones. I caught my balance. I was exhausted. I was bleeding from a dozen cuts on my feet. I was freezing, despite the cloak, and I was so angry. I stood up straight, clutched the cloak tighter, and stared her down. I didn't say a word. I just met her gaze. I wouldn't cower. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I would not let them see me break. My defiance, my silence, seemed to anger them more than tears would have. The circle tightened. "Silas!" The Beta's voice cut through the growls. He stormed back, his face thunderous. "The Alpha is asking for you." The crowd murmured. Shock. Disbelief. Silas grabbed my arm, not gently but not with the intent to harm, and dragged me through the crowd. They parted, their faces a mixture of confusion and hatred. He hauled me up a set of wide stone steps into the main healing hall. It was a vast, warm cave, smelling of dried herbs and wood smoke. Lucian was laid out on a massive cot of furs, his chest bare. He was awake, just. Sabine was pressing a steaming poultice to his wound. He flinched, but his gaze was fixed on the doorway. On me. "You," he rasped. "Alpha, she is wolfless," Sabine said, her voice sharp. "She's a bad omen. Let me put her in the kitchens. She can scrub pots. She's no use here." Lucian's hand, scarred and bloody, shot out and grabbed Sabine's wrist. His voice was a shredded whisper, but it was the most powerful sound I had ever heard. "She stays with me." The silence in the hall was electric. Sabine's eyes widened in pure, unadulterated shock. "She is my property," Lucian breathed, his one good eye burning into me. "She will be my personal attendant. She will nurse me." He took a ragged, painful breath, his authority rolling off him in waves. "No one touches her." He looked from Sabine to Silas. "No one speaks to her. No one looks at her. Unless I say so. Understood?" This was not a rescue. It was a prison sentence. He had just made me the most protected and the most hated person in the Shadowclaw pack. He had painted a target on my back for every jealous she-wolf, for every warrior who saw me as a bad omen. He had isolated me completely. The enemies to lovers dynamic was being forged in the fires of pack politics and pure hostile control. Sabine bowed her head, her spine stiff. "As you command, Alpha." She turned, her movements sharp. She walked to me, her eyes filled with a poison so potent it made my skin crawl. She thrust a wooden bowl and a rag into my hands. "He's all yours, Omega," she spat, her voice low. "Keep him alive, because if he dies, I'll be the one to sell you to Alpha Draven, personally." She stormed out of the hall, Silas following her. The great stone door boomed shut, leaving me alone. Alone with the wounded, delirious, and terrifyingly protective Alpha who had just claimed me in every way that mattered. I was trapped in his den, and I wasn't sure if I was his nurse or his prisoner. Chapter 10. The Enemies to Lover's First Touch. I was his prisoner. The great stone door boomed shut, and the silence in the healing hall was heavier and more terrifying than the hostile crowd. I was alone with him, alone with the wounded monster who had just declared me his. The first 2 days were a blur of fever and fear. Lucian drifted in and out of consciousness. His fever burned hot, the silver poison still clinging to his system. I was in constant motion, my terror channeled into a frantic, desperate energy. I cleaned the wound. I boiled herbs that Sabine's apprentices left by the door with a sneer. I forced bitter broths and water between his cracked lips. I did not sleep. Sabine was true to her word. She never entered, but she made her presence known. The food left for me was meagre: stale bread, thin soup. The apprentices, young she-wolves who looked at me with a mixture of fear and pure hatred, would accidentally spill water or leave the firewood just out of my reach. They were testing me, waiting for me to fail, waiting for me to run or to break down. I did neither. I ate the stale bread, I gathered the spilled wood, and I never, ever stopped tending to their alpha. On the 3rd day, the fever broke. I was dozing in the chair, my head on my chest, when his voice, quiet and clear, startled me awake. "You're still here." My head snapped up. Lucian was awake. He was propped up on one elbow, his uninjured side. His one good eye was sharp and lucid. The fever was gone, and he was watching me. "You are my attendant," I whispered, my heart hammering. "You commanded it." "I commanded you to stay," he corrected, his voice a low gravel. "I did not command you to work. Silas told me. You haven't slept." I flinched. I was expecting an order, not an observation. "You are healing," I said, stating the obvious, feeling small and stupid. He kept watching me. It was the most unnerving thing I had ever experienced. He assessed everything, his gaze moving from my face to my hands, which were now stained with herbs and soot, and back again. "Why?" he asked. "Why? What?" "Why?" he repeated, his voice patient. "Did you save me? The truth, not the sold part." I stood. I walked to the fireplace, adding another log. I needed to do something with my hands. "I told you the truth. If you die, I am sold to Draven. My life is forfeit." "You could have run," he countered. "In the woods. You could have run back to your whelp, Tristan." I spun around, and for the first time my anger overrode my fear. "Run back to him? The man who rejected me? The man who shot you, aiming for me? You think I have a home to run to?" The words hung in the air, sharp and bitter. Lucian's expression didn't change, but a new light flickered in his eye. Understanding. "No," he said, so quietly I almost missed it. "You don't." He was quiet for a long time. I returned to my chair, my anger spent, leaving me exhausted. He pushed himself to sit up straighter, and a pained grunt escaped him. He looked at the bandages on his chest. "They're crude," he grunted, "but they hold." "I am not a healer," I said, my voice defensive. "No, you're not." He looked at me again. "You're a Silvermoon, my enemy." "And you are a Shadowclaw," I shot back, "my pack's nightmare." The enemies to lovers dynamic was a tangible thing between us, a tight wire pulled taut. One wrong move, one slip, and it would snap. He gestured to his face. "Clean this," he commanded. "The healer's poultice itches." I bristled at the order, but I obeyed. I dipped a fresh rag in the warm water and knelt beside his cot. My hands were trembling. This was different. This wasn't a life or death wound. This was intimate. I reached out, my fingers hesitating. "It may hurt," I whispered. "Just do it," he growled. I pressed the warm, damp cloth to his temple, next to the scar. He didn't flinch. I wiped away the dried herbs and blood, my movements small and careful. His skin was hot. I could feel the thrum of his pulse beneath my fingers. I moved to his cheek, to the jagged, brutal scar that cut down over his blind eye. It was an old wound, silver-paled and puckered. I traced it gently with the cloth, cleaning the grime from the crease. He was absolutely still. He didn't breathe. My fingers brushed the corner of his beard. My pulse was roaring in my ears. I was touching the most dangerous alpha in the territories, and he was letting me. This was the first human touch I had received I couldn't even remember. That wasn't violent. My own hand, clumsy with exhaustion, slipped. My thumb brushed his lower lip. I gasped and snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. "I'm sorry, He caught my wrist. His grip wasn't iron this time. It wasn't a claim. It was just a hold. His fingers were rough and calloused, but his thumb moved over the pulse point on my wrist, a slow, mesmerizing stroke. I stared, wide-eyed. He wasn't looking at me with anger or command or even curiosity. His one blue eye was fixed on my face with a raw, searching intensity I didn't understand. It was a look of pure, agonizing need. He held me there, in the silent, fire-lit hall, his thumb brushing my skin. The protective alpha was being gentle. And I wasn't pulling away. The great stone door creaked open. Sabine the healer stood in the doorway, her arms full of fresh linens, her face a mask of pure, murderous rage. Chapter 11. Scars of a Protective Alpha. My blood ran cold. Lucian's gaze snapped from me to Sabine. He didn't release my wrist. If anything, his grip tightened, a silent act of defiance. Sabine's eyes flicked from his hand on my arm to my terrified face and back to him. She said nothing, but her look was poison. She stalked into the room, dumped the linens on a table and turned to me. "Get out, Omega," she snapped. "Your duties here are done. I will tend to the Alpha now." "She stays." Lucian's voice was flat, final. Sabine's spine went rigid. "Alpha, you are healing, but you are not healed. You don't need this distraction, this silver moon pet." "She is my attendant," Lucian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "And you are my healer. Tend to your duties and leave us." It was a blatant, shocking dismissal, a public choice. He had chosen me, the wolfless enemy, over his own high-ranking healer. Sabine's face went white. She looked as if he had slapped her. With a curt, furious bow, she spun on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door so hard a puff of soot fell from the chimney. The hall was silent again. Slowly, Lucian released my wrist. The spell was broken. I scrambled back to my chair, my heart pounding, my skin still tingling where he had touched me. You've just made her hate me more," I whispered, staring into the fire. "She already hated you," Lucian replied, his voice rough. "Now, she respects me. There is a difference." He watched me, his one good eye probing, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You are terrified of her, of everyone, but you weren't terrified when you pulled a silver arrow from my back." "That was different," I said. "That was a transaction. This is politics, and I'm the one who will pay for it." He was quiet for a long moment. "Sabine was my mother's healer," he said, his voice distant. "She has been overprotective since the attack." "The attack?" I asked, my curiosity momentarily overriding my fear. He nodded, his gaze turning to the fire. His hand went up, his fingers tracing the brutal silver scar that claimed his eye. "The one that gave me this," he said. I waited. The fire crackled. He had never spoken this much. "The Silvermoon Pack did not always fear us," he began, his voice a low rumble. "Years ago we were, if not allies, then we were not at war. My father was Alpha, I was his heir, and I was promised to a she-wolf." My heart gave a stupid, painful thump. She was beautiful, he continued, a bitter, hollow sound in his throat. And she was fated to another, a mate betrayal waiting to happen. But our fathers, Alaric and mine, they thought they could overrule the goddess. They wanted an alliance. He paused, his jaw tightening. She did not want me. She wanted the beta she was fated to, and she made a deal with her pack. My pack. She told them when my family would be riding, unarmed, through the Red Valley Pass. No, I breathed, horrified. Yes, his voice was dead. It was an ambush, just like the one Tristan set for me, but this one was successful. My father, my mother, my younger sister, all slaughtered. The Silvermoon warriors and traitors from my own pack. He stared into the flames, but I knew he was seeing something else. They held me down. Alaric, your old alpha, did this with a silver dagger. He said he wanted me to always remember what happens to those who take what isn't theirs. Then he left me for dead, blinded, scarred, and alone, in a pile of my own family. The story hung in the air, a horror so profound I couldn't breathe. This emotional love story, it wasn't a story at all, it was a tragedy. That, he whispered, his hand clenching into a fist, is why I am a protective alpha. It is why I built the walls. It is why I trust no one. He turned his head, his one icy blue eye pinning me to my chair. The look in it was so raw, so full of a shared ancient pain, that I felt my own broken bond ache in sympathy. I trust no one, he repeated, his voice low. Not my pack, not my warriors, and especially not a fated mate. He looked at me, a wolfless omega from the very pack that had destroyed his life. And then you, he breathed, his voice thick with a confusion that matched my own. You, who should hate me more than anyone, you stayed. You pulled the silver. You fought for me. He leaned forward, his power and his pain rolling off him in palpable waves. I don't know what you are, Evangeline, he whispered, his voice a raw confession, but you're mine. Chapter 12. The traitors returned. Mine. The word was a brand. It wasn't a word of love. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of possession that was as terrifying as it was protective. The next 2 weeks were a strange, tense truce. Lucian healed with supernatural speed. His command that I was his personal attendant was, I soon learned, absolute. I was given a small room, carved from the stone, adjoining his massive alpha's quarters. I was no longer in the healing hall, but I was just as much his prisoner. The pack's hatred was a cold wall of silence. No one spoke to me. No one looked at me. When I walked to the kitchens to get our food, they would part as if I carried a plague. And Sabine watched me, her eyes promising a painful future the moment the alpha's protection wavered. But it didn't waver. Lucian and I, we existed in the quiet space of his chambers. We ate our meals in silence. I read to him from old pack ledgers, his voice hoarse from disuse, my voice soft in the firelight. He was not what I expected. He was harsh, yes, he was demanding, but he was not cruel. He was a man defined by his duty. He worked from dawn until long after dusk, meeting with Silas, planning patrols, his mind always on the walls he had built to keep his people safe. And he watched me, always. He was a protective alpha in the truest sense. He didn't just protect his pack, he protected me. When a young warrior sneered at me in the hall, Lucian didn't even raise his voice. He just stopped, and his one cold eye promised a death so slow and painful the warrior turned white and all but ran. The enemies to lovers line was blurring into a forbidden love I didn't dare name. One night he was training in the courtyard, his chest and back now a map of fresh puckered scars. He was shirtless, slamming his fists into a wooden post, steam rising from his body in the cold night air. I was there as always, holding a water skin. He stopped, breathing heavily. "You're afraid of everyone," he stated. I am a wolfless omega in an enemy pack, I said, handing him the water. I have every right to be afraid. He drank, then wiped his mouth. You're a survivor, but you don't know how to fight. He took the water skin from me and before I could react, grabbed my wrist. He pulled me into the center of the yard. You won't always be beside me, he said, his voice hard. You need to be able to protect yourself. He pulled a small dagger from his boot and pressed it into my hand, hilt first. Hold it like this, he commanded. He stood behind me. I went rigid. His chest was a wall of heat against my back. His arm came around me, his large scarred hand covering mine, adjusting my grip on the dagger. Your thumb here, he rumbled, his voice low, his breath stirring my hair. You don't stab, you punch, with your whole body, like this. He moved with me, his body guiding mine, showing me the motion. My heart was a trapped bird. This was more intimate than any kiss. This was trust. Thwack, the horn, the alarm. We both froze. It was the high, sharp blast from the south tower. An attack. Lucian released me, his head snapping up, the alpha back in an instant. Silas! His beta was already running across the courtyard, his face pale. Alpha, Silas panted. Silvermoon warriors at the gate. 12 of them. They're not attacking. They're demanding parley. Tristan, Lucian snarled. Yes, Silas said, his expression grim. He's got a prisoner. He says he wants to return your property. My blood turned to ice. Lucian's one good eye found mine in the darkness. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed his leathers and stalked toward the gate. I grabbed my cloak and ran after him. We climbed the high stone steps to the top of the palisade. Below, in the torchlight, was a small, ragged group of Silvermoon warriors. And in the front, Tristan. He looked different. His golden boy features were twisted into an unfamiliar, ugly sneer. He was wild-eyed, consumed by the humiliation of his mate betrayal and his failed ambush. Lucian! He screamed, his voice cracking. I'm glad to see my arrow didn't finish the job. It gives me the pleasure of doing it myself. You're a long way from home, boy, Lucian boomed, his voice echoing off the mountains. You've brought me more of your pack to slaughter. I've brought you a trade, Tristan shrieked. He shoved a figure forward, and my hands flew to my mouth. It was another wolfless omega from my old pack, a girl named Lyra. She was bound, gagged, and weeping. A flawed omega for a flawed omega, Tristan yelled, pressing a knife to her throat. Send out Evangeline, or I'll send this one to the goddess in pieces. Lucian was silent, a statue of stone. What's the matter, Shadowclaw? Tristan taunted. Don't want to part with your new toy. He was goading him. This wasn't a trade, it was a trap. Send her out, Tristan roared, or I'll... No. Lucian's voice was quiet, but it cut through the night. Tristan froze, his knife pausing. What did you say? Lucian stepped into the full torchlight, magnificent and terrifying. He looked down at Tristan with all the contempt of a god. I said, no, Lucian repeated. You want her. He grabbed my arm and pulled me forward, shoving me into the light beside him, a public, shocking declaration. You come and take her. Chapter 13, The Forbidden Love Stand. Lucian's voice was a low, rumbling earthquake. You come and take her. He stood on the rampart, an immovable mountain of shadow and rage, his arm a steel bar around my waist, pinning me to his side. Tristan's face went purple with fury. His taunts, his trap, his pathetic show of power. It had all shattered against Lucian's absolute, possessive will. You dare! Tristan shrieked. You choose that nothing? Over your pack's safety? Over this innocent girl's life? He pressed the knife harder against the weeping Omega's throat. Lyra! Her eyes were wide with terror, pleading with me. My heart tore in two. Lucian, I whispered, pulling at his arm. Please, he'll kill her. He'll kill her anyway, Lucian growled, his voice too low for anyone but me to hear. This is not a trade, it's a performance, watch. Lucian raised his voice again, his alpha's command booming over the pass. You have 5 seconds to leave my lands, boy, or I will come down there and pin your traitor's hide to my gate. Tristan, faced with an unmovable object, completely unhinged. He was not a leader, he was a spoiled child throwing a tantrum. Fine, he screamed. If I can't have my property back, then no one can. He roared, and in one vicious, hateful movement, he didn't slit Lyra's throat. He did something worse. He plunged his dagger deep into her thigh, then brutally shoved her to the ground, leaving her to bleed out in the snow. That blood is on your hands, Evangeline, he shrieked. This isn't over, I'll burn your new master's fortress to the ground. He and his warriors turned and fled, vanishing into the darkness like the cowards they were. Archers, stand down, Lucian roared, stopping his men from shooting the retreating wolves in the back. Silas, open the gate, get her, bring her to Sabine, now. Warriors poured from the gate, securing the wounded, crying girl and carrying her back inside. I stood shaking, my knees weak. Lucian's arm was still around me, his body rigid with a controlled, white-hot fury. He didn't speak, he just turned, pulling me with him, and stalked from the wall. He didn't stop at the healing hall, he didn't stop to give orders. He dragged me through the stone corridors, up the stairs, and into his private chambers, slamming the heavy oak door behind us. The room was lit only by the fireplace. You should have traded me, I whispered, my voice trembling. That girl, she's wounded because of me. She's alive because I didn't, he bit back, spinning to face me. His one good eye was a blazing blue fire. It was a trap, Evangeline. He would have taken you, killed her, and laughed as he retreated. He wanted to make me look weak. To prove that you were still his to command. I am no one's, I cried, the tears I had held back finally streaming down my face. I am just a curse. Sabine was right. I am a curse. I bring nothing but death and pain. First your wound, now this. Stop. He crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbing my shoulders. You are not a curse. Then what am I? I sobbed, striking his chest with my small fists. Your property, your prisoner, your attendant. What am I to you, Lucian? He looked down at me, his face a mask of conflict, the enemies to lovers' war battling inside him. He saw my tears, my desperation. His expression softened. You, he began, his voice a raw whisper. He raised one large, scarred hand, his calloused thumb brushing a tear from my cheek. You are my attendant, who saved my life. You are my prisoner, who I trust at my back. You are my property, who I would burn the world for. He pulled me closer, his forehead resting against mine. You are not a curse, Evangeline, he breathed, his voice thick with an emotion I had never heard from him. You are my strength. That was what broke me. This emotional love story. It wasn't a fantasy. It was real. I leaned into his warmth, my hands splaying against the hard, scarred muscle of his chest. I was so scared, I whispered. I thought he would take me. I thought I would be sold again. Never, he vowed, his arms wrapping around me, crushing me to him. Never again. You are home. This is your pack. I am your pack. He kissed me. It was not gentle. It was a brand, a claim, a desperate, hungry sealing of a vow. It was all the pine and snow and fire of the mountains. It was all the rage from the battle and all the relief of the aftermath. It was the forbidden love stand, a final declaration. I kissed him back, my fingers tangling in his hair, all my fear, my anger, my grief pouring out of me. He broke the kiss only to lift me, his arms sliding under my legs as if I weighed nothing. He carried me to the massive cot of furs by the fire. He laid me down gently, his one blue eye searching my face. This wasn't the Alpha, this was Lucian, and he was asking a question. I gave him my answer. I reached up and, with a trembling hand, I traced the silver scar over his eye. "You are not a monster," I whispered. He closed his eye, a shuddering breath escaping him. The love-making scene that followed was not a hurried, desperate act. It was a slow, sacred healing. It was the unmaking of our scars. I kissed the scar on his eye, the fresh puckered skin on his chest where Tristan's arrow had struck, and he was so gentle, as if he were touching something infinitely precious. He treated my wolfless, flawed body like it was a temple. He showed me that a protective alpha didn't just protect with his claws and his fangs. He protected with his heart. Later, wrapped in his arms, skin to skin under the heavy furs, I felt safe. For the first time in my life, I was completely, utterly safe. I was not a possession. I was cherished. I drifted to sleep, my head on his chest, listening to the steady, powerful beat of his heart. I was woken hours later, in the grey-blue light before dawn. I was woken by a horn. It wasn't the high, sharp blast of an attack. It was a low, mournful, wavering sound, the horn of disaster. The door to our chamber burst open. Silas stood there, his face pale, his armor half-buckled. "Alpha," he panted, his eyes wide with a new terror. "The river, he didn't just retreat. Tristan, he's poisoned the southern river, our entire water source. It's turning black." Chapter 14. The Alpha's War. The stronghold was in chaos. The southern river was the lifeblood of the fortress. It provided water for drinking, for cleaning, for the forges, and it was now a running stream of sludge and death, the banks already littered with dead fish. "It's Nightshade and Silverleech," Sabine said, her face grim as she knelt by the reservoir. "He didn't mean to make us sick, he meant to kill us." Lucian was a storm of cold-focused rage. He was no longer the gentleman from the night before, he was the Alpha, and his pack was threatened. "Silas, take a team, ride to the mountain spring. It will be slow, but it's clean water. Go." "Yes, Alpha." "Sabine, all water is to be boiled, double the guards on our food stores. This was a prelude." "Alpha," she said, her voice tight, "this is her fault. This is the mate betrayal's final act. That Silvermoon whelp will not stop until he has her, or you are dead. This war, she brought it to us." The pack members around us murmured, their newfound respect for me vanishing under a fresh wave of fear. Sabine was right. No. I stepped forward, my voice shaking but clear. All eyes turned to me. I clutched the cloak Lucian had given me, the fur soft against my hands. "Sabine is right about one thing," I said, my voice growing stronger. "This is about Tristan, but she is wrong about his plan." Lucian turned, his one blue eye zeroing in on me. "What do you mean?" "I know him," I said, my stomach twisting. "I grew up watching him. He's arrogant, he's a coward, and he's a terrible strategist. Poisoning the river. It's too loud. It's a distraction." "A distraction?" Silas spat. "Our water is gone." "Exactly," I said, walking to the great map of the territories carved into the war room table. "He wants you to send all your warriors to the river. He wants you to focus your strength here, on the main gate. He knows you're a protective alpha, Lucian. He's counting on you to protect your resources." I put my finger on the map, far to the north. The old pass, the one you never use. It's crumbling, but it's a sheer climb. It's the only way to bypass the wall. "It's impassable," Silas argued. "No one has used it in a generation." "No warrior has," I corrected, "but I have. I used to gather herbs there. It's dangerous, but it leads directly to the back of the mountain, right above the healing hall." Lucian stared at the map. His jaw was tight. He was processing. He was seeing the strategy. "He's drawing our army south," Lucian rumbled, "while he leads his elite guard north to strike at our heart." He looked at Sabine. "She's right." He looked at Silas. Gather the war guard, all of them. You and I, we're going hunting. He turned to me. And you're coming with us. You're our guide. The ride was a blur of wind and snow. We rode hard, a small elite team of 10, Lucian at the head, me on a mare directly behind him. We left the chaos of the stronghold and rode into the silent, biting cold of the mountains. We reached the pass as the sun began to set, painting the snow a bloody orange. He's here, Lucian growled, dismounting. I can smell his fear. He was right. A dozen Silvermoon warriors, their best, were hidden in the rocks, but they weren't expecting us. Now, Lucian commanded. The battle was not a battle, it was a slaughter. Lucian and his warriors were shadows and death, moving through the rocks. The Alpha's war was swift, brutal, and decisive. I huddled behind a boulder, the dagger Lucian had given me clutched in my hand. It was over in minutes. Until only one was left, Tristan. He stood on a high ledge, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. Lucian stalked toward him, his great sword dripping. It's over, Tristan, Lucian growled. It's not, Tristan screamed, his eyes wild. He looked past Lucian, at me. You told him. You betrayed your own pack. You worthless, wolfless traitor. He raised his sword and charged. Not at Lucian. At me. He was insane. His eyes rolled back, all logic gone. I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to scream. I just reacted. You don't stab. You punch with your whole body. As Tristan raised his sword to strike me down, I lunged, just as Lucian had taught me. I drove the dagger forward, all my weight, all my rage, all my pain, into his side. He froze. His sword clattered to the rocks. He looked down at the hilt of the dagger sticking from his ribs. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with the final pathetic surprise. Evangeline, he whispered. And then Lucian was there. He grabbed Tristan by the throat, tore him away from me, and slammed him against the rock face. Tristan, wounded and beaten, finally broke. He sobbed, a pathetic, childish wail. I'm sorry. Alpha Alaric, he made me. I never wanted. I'm sorry. Lucian raised his greatsword, its silver edge gleaming in the twilight. He was going to end it. To end the bloodline that had taken everything from him. Lucian, I whispered, my voice shaking. He paused. Lucian, don't, I begged, tears welling in my eyes. Please, not like this, don't. For me. Lucian froze, his blade at Tristan's throat. He was torn between the vengeance his past demanded and the mercy his future was begging him for. Chapter 15. The fated mate's dawn. The silence on the mountain pass was absolute, broken only by Tristan's pathetic sobs. Lucian's arm was rigid, the muscles in his back coiled, his sword steady at Tristan's throat. His one good eye was a chip of ice, burning with 1,000-year-old hatred. He looked at Tristan, the last of the bloodline that had slaughtered his family. Then he looked at me. He saw my face, my tears, my plea. He saw the dagger in my hand, stained with Tristan's blood. He saw that I was not a victim, I was a survivor, and I would not be defined by more death. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, he lowered his sword. He let go of Tristan, who collapsed into a heap in the snow. You are not worth the blood on my steel, Lucian growled, his voice thick with contempt. You are not a wolf, you are a coward. He pointed his sword down the pass. You are an exile. You have no pack, you have no name. You will never set foot in Silvermoon or Shadowclaw territory again. If I ever see your face again, I will not be so merciful. Tristan scrambled to his feet, clutching his bleeding side, and fled, stumbling and falling into the darkness. He was gone. It was over. Lucian turned to me. He didn't speak. He just walked forward and pulled me into his arms, his face burying in my hair. I dropped the dagger and held onto him, my body shaking with the aftershock of the fight. We returned to the stronghold as the first light of dawn broke over the mountains. The pack was gathered in the main courtyard, their faces pale with fear and uncertainty. They saw us ride in, the Alpha, his Beta, and the Silver Moon Omega. And they saw that we were victorious. We dismounted. Lucian didn't let go of my hand. He held it, stained and bloody, and raised it for the pack to see. "The war is over," he boomed. "The traitor is exiled. The Silver Moon pack will answer to me." He pulled me to his side. "And this is not a Silver Moon Omega. She is Evangeline of the Shadowclaw. She is my guide. She is my strength." He looked at me, his one blue eye soft. "She is my Luna." A gasp went through the crowd. Sabine stepped forward. Her face was unreadable. She looked at me, at the blood on my clothes, at the resolve in my eyes. She looked at her Alpha, and for the first time, she saw him not as the scarred boy she'd tried to protect, but as the whole, healed man he had become. She bowed, a deep, respectful bow. "My Alpha," she said, and then she looked at me. "My Luna." The courtyard erupted. A cheer went up, 1,000 voices, 1,000 howls, shaking the very foundations of the mountain. I was home. Weeks later, the stronghold was at peace. The Northern Spring provided clean water, and the Silver Moon pack, now led by a new council, had sworn fealty to their new, powerful Alpha. I stood on the rampart, watching the sunrise, the dawn. A heavy fur cloak settled over my shoulders, and strong arms wrapped around my waist from behind. Lucian. He rested his chin on my shoulder, and we watched the light spill into the valley. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "I never thought so," he rumbled, his voice soft in my ear. "It was always just the end of the watch, the start of another day to survive." I leaned my head back against his chest. "And now?" He was quiet for a long moment. He kissed the side of my head, his beard soft against my skin. "Now," he whispered, "it's a promise." He turned me in his arms, his one blue eye, once so cold, now filled with a warmth that was all for me. I was a protective Alpha who built walls of stone to keep everyone out. You were a wolfless Omega who tore them all down without even trying." "I was just trying to save myself," I smiled. "I know," he said, his thumb brushing my lips. "And in doing so, you saved me." He kissed me, a soft, slow promise of 1,000 sunrises to come. They said true love was a fated mate. But our emotional love story was never written by the stars. It was written in the scars. And in the end, it was the only love that was real.